Rosemary Gregg here on Wednesday, March the 25th. We're going to talk a little bit today about the 5 basic principles of STOTT Pilates because many of you don't do a mat class, you just do reformer. So as you're working through the videos, I think it's important for you to have a good understanding of the 5 basic principles, how to put your body in the proper position, and why the principles are important as you work through the movements. The first principle is going to be breathing. The second principle is pelvic placement. Third, rib cage placement. Fourth, scapula stabilization and movement. And the last one is head and cervical spine placement. So we're going to take our place on our mat and we're going to talk a little bit about each principle, how to apply them to the exercises, and why they're important. So let's first start with the breathing. Let's take our place on our mat. And we want to start with our knees hip distance apart and hands by the body. As we breathe, we want to inhale through the nose and exhale through a pursed lip like we are blowing out a candle or fogging up a mirror. And it's very important that you inhale and exhale deeply and engage all of your lateral and posterior muscles below the rib cage. You want the air to go into the lateral and posterior part of your body, or right here where I have my hands. So as you're breathing, just lay on your mat, place your hands below your ribs, on your sides, and just start inhaling and exhaling. And see if you can feel these areas moving up and out as you inhale to promote your spinal extension, and compressing in and down as you exhale to promote your spinal flexion. Okay, so that is a little bit on the breathing. Now we're going to talk a little bit about rib cage placement. All of your abdominals attached to your rib cage. Okay, so you have your internal obliques, which are up high here. You have your external obliques, which would be like you're putting your hands in your pockets. You have your transverse abdominis, which lies between your rib cage and your hip bones and wraps horizontally around your body like a piece of cellophane. And that abdominal muscle is actually your largest and strongest abdominal muscle. Then you have your rectus abdominis muscle, which is your six-pack ab, or the muscle that you use to do your ab crunches, and that starts at your rib cage and connects to your pubic bone. So all of your abdominal muscles attach to your rib cage. So you want to make sure that when you're exercising, your ribs and hip bones are held as close together as possible so that you're able to pull yourself up off the mat because you have proper rib cage placement and all of your abdominals are being engaged. Okay, so let's lie down and talk a little bit about that. All right, so we're going to take our arms up to the ceiling. Okay, improper rib cage placement is when you bring your arms back like this and you pop your ribs forward. You never want to put your hands on the floor and pop your ribs because it would be really hard to lift your body all the way up and reach for your feet. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to start here. Okay, so we're going to take an inhale. And as we exhale, we're just going to bring those arms back to a 45 degree, holding the ribs and hip bones close together. Then we're going to bring our arms back up to the ceiling and down to the floor. So let's do a couple more of those. We inhale, we exhale, holding the ribs and hip bones close together. We inhale, bring the arms back up, and exhale, bring the palms down. That is proper rib cage placement. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the available positions of your pelvis. You have the normal, natural curve underneath your low back, which is called your neutral pelvis. Then you have an anterior pelvic tilt where your pelvis tilts this way. And then you have a posterior pelvic tilt where your pelvis tilts this way. So in order to feel those positions, let's take the heels of our hands, place them on our hip bones, and make a little triangle with our thumbs and our forefinger. Let's pretend that we have a cup of water sitting in this triangle. Right now we're in our neutral pelvis with that natural lordotic curve, so the water is sitting really still. First thing we're going to do is an anterior pelvic tilt, and we never want to do this in Pilates, but just so if I say don't tilt your pelvis anterior, you'll know what I'm referring to. So we want to start with an inhale and we're going to exhale and tilt that pelvis towards our heels, sending that water towards our heels and arching our back, excessively arching our back. Now let's just rock our pelvis back to neutral. And let's go again. Let's inhale, tilt the pelvis towards the heels, and exhale, rock the pelvis back. So that's your anterior pelvic tilt. We do want to do a posterior pelvic tilt in Pilates. This is very important because it lengthens out your low back, bringing your lumbar spine closer to the mat and flattening out that natural lordotic curve. So you want to start with an inhale, and as we exhale, we're going to tilt our pelvis towards our face, sending that cup of water towards our chest, and then we're going to rock that pelvis back to neutral. And again, we're going to inhale, we're going to exhale, tilt the pelvis towards the face, flattening the low back, sending the water towards the chest, and one more time, let's go back to neutral. Okay, so those are the three available positions of the pelvis. You have neutral, you have anterior, and you have posterior. Okay, to keep the low back safe when you're doing an open kinetic chain exercise or when you have your legs up in the air, we want to go into what's called an imprinted position of the spine. So in order to do that, we need to shorten our obliques, use our abdominal muscles, and do that posterior pelvic tilt. So now we're going to do a little exercise so you can feel what an imprint feels like. You're going to take your thumbs and place them on your low ribs and your fingertips and place them on your hip bones. Pretend like these are suspenders between these 2 points. And we're going to shorten those suspenders over our clothes, or we can also say they're our suitcase straps. We're going to pull them tight over our clothes. Suspenders are suitcase straps. I think you get the idea. We're going to pull them tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to start first with an inhale, and as we exhale, we're going to do that posterior pelvic tilt, and we're going to bring the ribs and hip bones closer together, activating that deep transverse abdominis muscle right here in the center between these 2 points. So then let's rock our pelvis back to neutral. And again, we're going to inhale. As we exhale, we're going to shrink that space, going into that imprint, bringing the low back flat to the mat, and then we're going to rock that pelvis back to neutral. One more time, we're going to shorten these suitcase straps. So we're going to inhale. As we exhale, we're going to tighten those straps over the clothes, shortening those obliques, bringing the ribs and hip bones close together, and then rock to neutral. Okay, so that's what we call imprint. So we would go into that imprint right before we bring our legs up to tabletop like this. You want your low back lengthened and fairly flat onto the mat. So going into that imprint position first will be very beneficial. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about our scapula. Your scapula has these available movements. You have elevation, moving your scapula up the spine. You have depression, moving your scapula down your spine. You have upward rotation, and you have downward rotation. You have protraction, moving the scapula away from the spine, and retraction, bringing the scapula closer to the spine. So we're going to do a few examples of the movement of the scapula. And the reason the scapula is important to the body is because it lacks bony attachment. It doesn't attach to the rib cage or the spine. It only attaches to the clavicle. And it's responsible for the movement of your upper limbs or your arms. So we want to make sure that the movement of your upper limbs is also stabilized. So we want to strengthen and support the muscles around that scapula. So let's lie down on our mats. And the first thing we're going to do is protraction, moving the shoulder blades away from the spine. So we're going to inhale and reach the fingertips for the ceiling tiles, and we're going to exhale, pull the shoulders back to neutral. So we're going to inhale and protract, moving the shoulder blades away from the spine, and exhale neutral. Now we're going to bring the shoulder blades closer to the spine, or retraction. We're going to inhale and squeeze those shoulders together in the back, and then exhale, release to neutral. And again, inhale and squeeze, and exhale and neutral. Feel the shoulder blades slide across the rib cage when they go back to neutral. You're going to feel them slide across the rib cage and then go flat. Okay, so now we're going to do elevation. Okay, we never want to do this when we're working out, but I just want you to know what it is. We want to inhale and slide our shoulders towards our ears, and then exhale, bring the fingers back to neutral, the shoulders back to neutral. And again, inhale, slide your shoulders up towards your ears, then exhale, slide your fingers down and release the scapula to neutral. We don't want to exercise with our scapula elevated like this, because that's going to create tension in your neck. You want to make sure your scapula is down. Okay, so we want to make sure it's in this position called depressed position. So we're going to start with an inhale, and as we exhale, we're going to slide our fingers down towards our heels, moving the shoulder blades down the spine, and then release back to neutral. We're going to take an inhale. As we exhale, we're going to slide those fingers towards the heels, moving the shoulder blades down the spine, and then inhale, go back to neutral. It's very important before you lift up off the mat that you have your shoulder blades in that depressed position, move down your spine, then you're going to proceed to lift your upper body off the mat and your arms. So that will get your scapula in the proper position so you don't have tension in your neck and shoulders. Now we're going to do upward rotation, which are basically arm circles. So we're going to start here as we inhale. We're going to exhale, circle up and around. That's called upward rotation of the scapula. And then we'll pause at the center. Now we're going to do downward rotation. So we're going to start with an inhale. We're going to exhale, circle down and around. Again, keeping the rib cage down as you circle. You don't want to pop those ribs forward. So you want to keep your ribs and hip bones close together, and then bring your hands slowly down by your sides. Okay, the last principle is called head and cervical spine placement. The cervical spine will only flex or bend on the first two vertebrae. So you want to make sure you're just flexing your neck on the first two vertebrae, which is called a cranial vertebral flexion, or flexing on the first two vertebrae. You don't want to ever jam your chin down to your chest like this, or do any work with your head extended back like this. You always want to just flex it on the first two vertebrae so that you don't have tension in your neck and shoulders, and that you're pulling your cervical spine from a proper position so you don't get neck pain or neck tension. So we're going to do a little exercise called red light, green light, so you know how the cranial vertebral should flex before you lift up off the mat. So we're going to lie down on our mat, and we're going to look straight up at the ceiling as if we were looking at a red traffic light. Now you're going to inhale and take your eye gaze down, nodding your chin slightly as if you were looking at the green. And then again, exhale, let's look up at the red. Inhale, nod the chin and look down at the green. Exhale, red. Inhale, green. So before we lift up off the mat, we would do that inhale. We would flex that cervical spine by looking at the green light. We would get our shoulders in the right position by exhaling, depressing that scapula, and then lifting up off the mat. So then we would lower back down. So let's do that one more time. We would inhale, do that head nod, look at that green light. Exhale, we're going to slide the fingers down towards the heels, moving the shoulder blades away from the spine. Then we will proceed to lift. Now you have your shoulder blades in the proper position, your cervical spine in the proper position, so you won't obtain tension in your neck and shoulders. If you pull your head back like this and just lift up like that, you're going to have all kinds of tension in your neck. So that's why you want to inhale and do that head nod. Exhale, slide that scapula down the spine, and then proceed to lift your body up off the mat. So that is the 5 basic principles of STOTT Pilates. And to recap, we're going to say they're breathing, rib cage placement, pelvic placement, scapula stabilization and movement, and head and cervical spine placement.